the theme, the Sanganite theme that's been running for the last few months, and it's called Total Transformation, Head, Heart and Guts. So this is what Buddhism's all about. Buddhism's all about total transformation. And for total transformation to happen, the whole weight of our being needs to be behind it. So before I start properly, I've got a rousing quote that I came across. So it's from Sangharakshita. And he's talking about the spiritual life. The serpent of egotism must be uncoiled ring by ring from the heart. Its twin fangs of greed and malice extracted, its deadly venom neutralized drop by drop. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we need. That's why we need total transformation. This is what we're dealing with. So here we find ourselves, we're mortal beings in an ever-changing world with some taste, some calling of something beyond, however faint. Otherwise, we just wouldn't be here. So here we all are. And it's no easy task. We're not just fine-tuning ourselves. We're smashing apart selfishness, so that something more beautiful can arise, something more potent, something more meaningful. So we need it all. We need everything that we've got. We need a full-blooded approach. No stone left unturned. Top to bottom transformation, total transformation. Okay. So that's what this series is about. And throughout the series, we're opening up these different areas of practice. That all together, you could say, make up the total amount of our energies. So the head, the wisdom aspect, the heart, the compassion, the positive emotion, and the guts, the deeper drives, the powerful energies. So really, in experiential terms, wisdom, compassion, and energy, we can't really separate these out from each other. But in practical terms, it can help if we call each one of these qualities to mind so we can get a clearer sense of it. And so there are a set of 3 bodhisattvas called the 3 protectors, Manjughosha, Avalokiteshvara, and Vajrapani. And these are living symbols on the highest possible level, on the transcendental level of these qualities. So we've heard from Vidanya and others about Manjughosha that represents wisdom. And a few weeks ago from Surimati we'd heard about Avalokiteshvara. That is a symbol for compassion, for positive emotion. And in a few weeks' time we'll be hearing about Vajrapani, a symbol for energy. So currently, we're exploring more deeply the heart, the positive emotion. So Surimati opened up the symbolism of Avalokiteshvara for us, and last week Dharma Mai talked in that context about harmony, and I'm going to carry on from this. But before I do, so I'm going to talk about positive emotion in terms of support and protection, in terms of protection really. But before I do, there's some points about positive emotion, general points that I want to make. So Avalokiteshvara, the Lord who looks down, the Bodhisattva of compassion, I think sometimes it's more helpful to think in terms of metta rather than compassion explicitly. So metta is the will for the happiness of another person, being really for that person. So we all know what it's like to be against someone. Metta is the opposite of that, being for someone. And presumably to an enlightened being like Avalokiteshvara, when Avalokiteshvara looks down from such a perspective, an enlightened perspective of peace, of great bliss, of everlasting fulfillment, everything that Avalokiteshvara sees is tinged with suffering. So that metta then is transformed into compassion. But for us, I don't think that we see things in the same way, really. I don't think we're looking around us and seeing all these people doing all these things that really annoy us and we don't agree with and thinking, poor them, for them. They're suffering. I have compassion for them. So those poor deers, I don't think that that's the way we're seeing things. So much more helpful, I think, to think in terms of metta. So metta is the root emotion, the root positive emotion. And when it meets different situations, it's transformed. So when it meets suffering, it's transformed into compassion. When metta meets someone who's really happy, it's transformed into what's called mudita, sympathetic joy. So if we cultivate metta, compassion takes care of itself. And the reason that I'm saying this is I think pity can easily be mistaken for compassion. So I think compassion's easily misunderstood. There's some sort of pale, bit bent out of shape, falsified emotion. So it's a positive emotion. Compassion is not sentimentality. It's not self-indulgent. It's not sort of nice, nicey nice or a bit sort of sickly. It's not about passivity. It's not about getting walked all over. And compassion it's not like getting all emotional, like how someone might get after a few drinks. It's not like getting all emotional. It's not that. It's not just a feeling component. So it's intentional, it's potent, it's skillful, there's a clarity there, there's an awareness, there's a purpose. So feeling is an aspect of metta, but primarily it's volitional. So it's karmically active, karmically weighty. It has effects, it's transformative. So emotion, so you'll remember from the introductory course, emotion. So it moves us, it moves self and other. So in other words, positive emotion, the heart, what we're talking about, what Avalokiteshvara is representing, it's ethical. So that's what we're going to be exploring tonight. So the big question is, how can positive emotion, skillful behaviour, ethical practice protect us? That's the big question I'm going to try and answer tonight. How can ethical practice protect us? And to do that, to answer that question, I'm going to be using a sutta from the Pali Canon, and it's called the Sigalabhada Sutta. So the Pali Canon, canon just means a collection of sacred books, and Pali is an ancient Indian language that some of the Buddhist words were written down into. So it's a record of the Buddha communicating with lots of different people, trying to communicate something of the Dharma to them, trying to inspire them, trying to delight them. So I'm going to be using the Sigalabhada Sutta. And it's from the long discourses, which basically just means long talks. Okay, so someone communicating at length with the Buddha. Okay, so to set the scene, so it takes place in India, so where the Buddha walked around 2,500 years ago. And the Buddha was staying outside of a big city called Rajagriha, in a place that sounds really delightful, the squirrels' feeding place. So presumably where people fed squirrels. So the squirrels' feeding place in the bamboo grove. So I've just got back off pilgrimage with 20 other great people from the Sheffield Sangha. And we visited places that the Buddha stayed and taught. And the Buddha really liked beautiful places. Yeah. So you can imagine it's a beautiful place outside this big city. And this big city surrounded by walls, Rajagriha, surrounded by walls and with a big gate. And he was walking from the squirrels' feeding place, from the bamboo grove, very early in the morning, into the city to beg for his food. Okay, so the Buddha lived on the alms of others, lived on the generosity of people giving him food. And as he was walking really early in the morning from the squirrels' feeding place into the city, he came across quite an unusual sight. And so, having been to India, there's lots of unusual sights in India. what he saw was a young man, and this young man had his clothes still wet, his hair still wet, and he saw that what he was doing was bowing in 6 directions. Okay, so I imagine it goes something like this. So he saw this young man bowing north, bowing east, south, west, up, and down. So quite unusual. And the Buddha, instead of just walking past, he thought, I'll go and investigate why this person is bowing to these directions, north, south, east, west, up and down. Okay, so this person, this young man, a little bit about him. So he's called Sigala. Okay, so the sutta, the Sigala Bhada Sutta means advice to Sigala. He's called Sigala. And Sigala is a layman, so he's not a wandering ascetic like the Buddha. He doesn't wander around. He has social responsibilities. He lives within society. So he lives within that social structure. So the Buddha's advice to him is very relevant to us. Okay, and he's a young Brahmin, which means he belongs to a privileged caste. So he's quite a privileged person, Sigala. And he's set to take on his father's merchant business. Now, interestingly, the name Sigala actually means jackal. Okay, so Sigala means jackal. And in Indian mythology, jackals were a bit of a trickster. Okay, they were tricksters. So maybe you could read in between the lines, you could say, young Sigala, the jackal. He might have been a bit of a lad, okay, a bit of a wide boy. We might have called him a bit of a dirty dog in our language, a bit of a player in the vibrant city of Rajagriha. Okay, so Sigala the jackal, and his parents were devoted followers of the Buddha, but to their dismay, they found that their young son, Sigala the jackal, he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in the Buddha. And he gave 3 reasons for this. He said, look, I'm having nothing to do with those monks. First of all, paying homage to them will make my back ache and my knees stiff. Okay, so that was his first reason. So second, I'd have to sit on the ground and my clothes would get dirty. And the third reason, he said, and if I got into conversation with them, after so sitting and getting my clothes dirty, and after so bowing with my knees aching and my stiff back, I'd get to know them and then I'd have to invite them round to my house and give them things. And that only means losses for me. Okay. So you can imagine what type of person Sigala was. So when Sigala's father was on his deathbed, he became worried about his son, not surprisingly. He became worried that his son might fall into trouble after he's gone. And he wanted to protect his son. He wanted to protect his son from the dangers of the world. So what he asked his son to do, he said, to protect you, what I want you to do is I want you to go out early in the morning, every morning after your morning bath, go outside the city walls and bow to the guardians of the 6 directions, north, east, south, west, up and down. Bow to those guardians and they'll protect you. Okay, so India is full of dangers. And that, I'm sure, it seemed pretty much the case when I just visited, so I'm sure it's even more the case there. India's full of dangers. If you don't look after yourself, you're in serious trouble. So his father really wanted his son to be protected, and as Sigala said, okay, every morning I'll I'll go and I'll bow to these 6 directions. Hence the Buddha found him there with wet hair, wet clothes, bowing. And his father could die in peace, knowing that his business will be okay, that his son will be okay. So this is basically what Sigala told the Buddha. He said, here I am every morning, bowing to these directions. Maybe eyes still blurry from the night out before, but here I am, I'm bowing, I'm protecting myself. And then he says something quite interesting. Out of respect for my father's words, this is why I'm doing it, that I revere, honour and hold sacred. Okay. So although he's a jackal, he holds sacred his father's words. So this is why he's out. So the Buddha replies to Sigala, and he replies very skillfully. So he doesn't just say, that's not going to work. You can't just do whatever you like and then bow to these 6 directions in the morning and be fine. That's not how it works. He doesn't say that. He says that's not the right way to pay homage to the 6 directions. And he says, and he communicates in a way that Sigala will understand. So he doesn't tell him that he's been wasting his time. He says, I'm going to tell you how to do it properly, according to the noble ones. And if you do this, you'll be fully protected. You'll be fully protected. And Sigala's really up for this. His ears perk up. He says, yes, I definitely want to be fully protected. I definitely want this. Please tell me how to do it. Okay. So the first thing that the Buddha tells Sigala, basically what the Buddha does is he describes an ethical life to Sigala. He describes an ethical life. And the first thing he says is refrain from doing unskillful actions. Okay. So we're assuming Sigala has lived an unskillful life. And he says, in order to recover these directions, these 6 directions, I'm going to give you a list of things to avoid. So first of all, he gives a list of ethical principles, okay, in their negative form. So renouncing unskillful actions of body and speech. He says, abandon hating, abandon taking life, abandon stealing, abandon lying, and abandon sexual misconduct. And then he says, and then abandon skillful actions of the mind. So abandon greed, abandon hatred, abandon delusion, and abandon fear. So he lays out the principles first, okay? So we recognise these sets of principles, the precepts. But he probably knows that's not enough for Sigala. So he's given him the principles, but Sigala really needs it spelling out. Okay, so he takes these principles and he applies them directly to the kind of life that Sigala would be leading, the kind of life that a party boy 2,500 years ago in Rajagriha might be leading, the type of things that he might get up to. So he applies them straight forward to Sigala. And he says, I'm going to give you a list of things that waste your prosperity, waste your substance, waste your energy. Okay? So no big philosophical debate needed, just spells out these causes and effects. So I think this is a really, for me, a really poignant point that the Buddha doesn't go into philosophy. He just really makes it very, very clear. It's the genius of the Buddha, I think. The Buddha I read this, I thought, the Buddha's a genius. He's so clear on causes and effects. If we do something, the effects are going to be like this. So there's 6 lots of 6 of them for the 6 directions. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read them out and see if any of them jump out at you. Okay. So he says, Sigala, you should abandon drink and drugs because of these dangers. You waste your money. you get into lots of arguments, you ruin your health, you ruin your reputation, you ruin your mind, and you take your clothes off in unsuitable places. And I thought, you can't really argue with that. That, in fact, is what happens. So it's very, very relevant. Very, very relevant. And he says, Sigala, abandon being out on the street at night because of these dangers. You're defenseless and without protection. So are the people that you love. So is your property. You might be suspected of doing crimes. You'll be accused of all sorts of things, and you will encounter all sorts of unpleasantness. Okay, again, very, very relevant. Sigala, abandon bad company, because any of these people will become your companions. Gamblers, cheats, tricksters, selfish people, bullies, and drunks. And this one might need a little bit of translation. Abandon looking for fun fairs. Okay. Fun fairs here, I'm thinking are nights out parties. Abandon looking for parties all the time, Sigala. And I think this is still relevant because you will always be thinking, where is the dancing? Where is the singing? Where are they playing music? Where are they reciting? Where is the hand clapping? Where are the drums? Okay, so always be thinking about these things. Where's the next thing? Where's the next bit of pleasure? Where's the next bit of distraction? Abandon gambling because of these dangers. The winner makes enemies. The loser bewails his loss. One wastes one present wealth. One's word is not trusted. Your friends stop liking you. And you're not in demand for a marriage. You're not in demand for a wife. Okay, so we can put our own thing in there. And the last one, being lazy and making these excuses. Abandon this, Sigala. Abandon making these excuses. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's too early. It's too late. I am too hungry. I am too full. Because if you do this, the chance to do good will slip away. Okay? So you see where we're going with this. So abandon those excuses. Abandon the excuses that stop us getting around to doing good. Okay? So one of the things you might want to talk about after the talk are any of these still relevant? Are any of these particularly relevant to us or particularly relevant to you? Do you agree with them? Do you not agree with them? I know when I was reading this list, I mean, it's for me, it's just there in black and white. I couldn't really argue with any of them. If you do these things, this will happen. So if you act unskillfully, these negative consequences will happen. So the question that I ask myself is, well, why do I act unskillfully then? What's sort of behind all this? And although it's going to be a long working process, I think it's all about short-term pleasures over long-term satisfaction. So these are all about going for short-term pleasures and abandoning long-term satisfaction. That's basically what it seems to come down to. The ethical practice is a long game. Ethical practice is the long game. Okay, you've got to be looking forward to long-term satisfaction. So a quote popped into my mind actually when reading those from Layer Cake, which is a film about a drug dealer. And he's talking about just how many people want to take drugs. And he just says, well, I'm just giving the people what they want. Good times today and stupor tomorrow. And I thought, that is, I'm better than that. We're better than that. We are better than that. It's just not good enough. And at some point, renunciation has to happen. At some point, unskillful things have to drop away. If year after year, unskillful patterns of behaviour that really cause problems aren't being renounced, then something's amiss, something's going wrong. And it's not about being pious or rigid or really boring. It's not about fitting yourself into a little box and just being really nice. So skillful action, skillful behaviour is joyous, it's energising, it's freeing. After we do the refuges and precepts, we say 3 sadhus. And sadhu basically just means hooray, yes. So it's like we're celebrating 3 times living an ethical life. So an ethical life is joyous in the end, ultimately. If it's not joyous, again, something's amiss. Okay, so they're the first thing that the Buddha tells Sigala. Okay, so stop doing these various unskillful things. And then he gives him some skillful actions to practice. And he brings then in the 6 directions that Sigala was bound to. Okay. So he designates each one of the 6 directions into a certain type of relationship that's relevant to Sigala. Okay. So you can try and imagine these 6 directions make up basically a sphere of relationships around us. So in the East, he said, think of your parents, think of your mother and father, okay, the people that raised you, the people who gave you life. In the South, think of your teachers, so your secular teachers, the people who taught you how to read, how to write, skills that you might have learned from people. Think of your secular teachers. In the West, to Sigala, he said, think of your wife and child. But really that can be translated as think of if there's a significant person in your life. So it might be a husband or wife, might be a partner or just one significant person. In the North, said, think of your friends, bring your friends to mind. Up, he said, think of ascetics and Brahmins, which is basically spiritual teachers. Think of your spiritual teachers. And down, he said to Sigala, think of your workers, your servants and your helpers. But for us, we can translate that into people who serve us. So people who support our life. So he said, think of these 6 types of relationships in each one of the 6 directions. Okay? So bring them to mind. And interestingly, you'll notice that there's no bias in one of the directions. So each direction is a cardinal point. It's equally important. Okay, so we can tend to put particular weight in the West, the significant other, on the person, on our partner. So we can tend, or whoever it is that's just that one person who's significant in our lives, we can tend to put a lot of weight behind them, a lot of importance behind them. But I don't think that this really protects us as fully as if we've got equal weight, equal importance to each one of the 6 relationships, each one of these types of relationships. So there's a balance, there's a balancedness about it. Okay, so he told Sigala, bring these types of people to mind. Okay, so that's what I did. So I brought these types of people to mind. The teachers again, spiritual teachers up. In the East, parents. In the south, secular teachers. Down, the people that support me. In the west, a significant other. And in the north, friends. So I thought of these 6 directions, and I thought, okay, who in my life are in these directions? Okay, so I came up with this. A really, really good thing to do. I felt really, really positive after doing it. And not surprisingly, as I was writing down these names, thinking back particularly to all my primary school and secondary school teachers, as I was thinking back, gratitude started arising. And it really reminded me, and if you can remember, I'm sure it reminds you of the gratitude exercise from the introductory course. So writing down people who have benefited you in some way. Okay, so gratitude, the Pali word katanyata basically means knowledge of benefits received. Okay, so it's knowing that you've received these benefits. So it reminded me of that exercise. And already, seeing this, I started to feel a little bit more protected, actually. Just something about noticing that I'm intimately connected with, in all these different ways, to all these different types of people. I started to feel protected. And gratitude is an extremely powerful volition, powerful emotion. So in the second week after the Buddha's enlightenment, he stood at the Bodhi tree and gazed at the Bodhi tree for 1 week with unblinking eyes as a mark of gratitude for the Bodhi tree sheltering him after he attained enlightenment. So one of the first things the Buddha did after he gained enlightenment was gaze at this Bodhi tree with gratitude, gaze at the tree that helped him, that covered him from the elements, that helped him gain enlightenment. So gratitude. So immediately now Sigala is filling in these directions with types of people, bringing them to mind. Gratitude arises, and gratitude protects us. And then the Buddha went through then each one of these types of relationships and explained to Sigala how to act ethically in them. Okay. So this is something you might want to try. So go back to this slide, this sheet. Okay. He also pointed out, the Buddha, the reciprocal nature of these relationships, and that if you act with metta, if you act with kindness, he used the word minister. So minister literally means to attend the needs to. If you attend the needs of these people in these types of relationships, there'll be a reciprocal response, and kindness will be shown back to you. And the word that he used is anakampa, which literally means to vibrate with. So he said if you vibrate with kindness outwards in these directions to these relationships, they'll vibrate back. You'll get a resonance of kindness back. So I'm not going to go through each one of these directions in great detail, just to give you a flavour of what the Buddha said about each of these directions. Okay, so firstly, starting with spiritual teachers. So for me, I'm really happy I have this dimension in my life of spiritual teachers. I don't really know what I'd do without it, and it feels an appropriate position almost. Spiritual teachers, it feels like spiritual teachers pull me up. Okay, so I don't know if you saw my list, but I had the Buddha. So the Buddha at the top of my spiritual teachers. And then all the other teachers. And I'm very, very lucky that I've got lots of teachers in my life. All the other teachers are like windows that I look through to see the Buddha. Okay, they all pull me up. And a response to this, a response to spiritual teaching, a response to seeing something more in life is, my response is reverence. Okay. And I don't know how long ago it was actually, maybe a year or so ago, I met Aryadasa, so the person who founded this movement. I only met him for half an hour, and the one thing that I took away from meeting him is he was just a man of reverence. Actually, the way that he talked about people and the way that he talked about the Buddha, just reverence just seemed to come off him, and he's written about this, how he experiences reverence very keenly. So spiritual teachers, so in the up direction, can generate really positive emotions of reverence. Okay. So in the East, parents. So the Buddha says about parents, support them if necessary. Help them with their responsibilities as they get old. Keep up any positive traditions they might have, and remember them when they die, and be generous on their behalf. Okay, that's what the Buddha says. So if you want to protect this direction, the eastern direction, where the sun rises, where we've come from, do these things. Okay, so that's advice to Sigala. And just to really comment, one of the best things that I did was repair a relationship with my mother. So I was estranged from my mum for quite a few years. And what I realised is that I couldn't get away with having someone so important in my life and being so angry with them, basically, so negative towards them. Eventually that would hold me back. Eventually that would start affecting other relationships that I was in. So it felt very, very poignant and really important to go back and repair that relationship. So the East, so supporting your parents if necessary. Okay? So I'll run through these quite quickly. Next. The friends in the north. So the Buddha has something interesting to say about friends. I was wondering whether to read this bit, but I will. So he talks about false friends, how to spot false friends, which is interesting. So we can, we can get and I suppose friends are an area where we have a lot of choice over who's our friend. So interesting how to spot false friends. The friend who seeks what they can get, the friend who talks but empty words, the friend who merely flatters you, the friend who is a fellow waster. These four friends are really foes, not friends. The wise person, recognizing this, holds themselves aloof. Okay, interesting. But this is the Buddha's advice to Sigala. And how to spot loyal friends. The friend who is a helper, the friend in times good and bad, the friend who shows the ways that's right, the friend who's full of sympathy. These four kinds of friends are wise. The wise should know their true worth, and they should cherish them with care, just like a mother cherishes their child. And he goes on to say, cherish your friends by being generous to them, by communicating kindly with them, by looking after their welfare, and by treating them like yourself, and keep your promises. And this will be reciprocated by a friend who looks after you when you're unmindful, is a refuge in fear, and doesn't desert you in times of trouble. Okay. And just before I gave this, just before Sangha night, so I was writing my talk. So I was writing it in my bedroom, and I could hear Maitreya outside chanting the Amoghasiddhi mantra. So Amoghasiddhi is the fearless Buddha, And I don't know if you knew I was writing my talk or not, but that just came through the walls. So a refuge in fear. Friends can be a refuge in fear when you really need them. And in order to have friends, we need to be a friend. Okay? And you need to have time for our friends. We need to have time for our friends. So there's a lot of different relationships, a lot of different directions, and we need to try and make time for them all. This is the Buddha's advice to Sigala. Okay? So, in the West, the significant other. Interesting, the Buddha says, respect them, don't disparage them, don't be unfaithful, don't take all the authority, make sure they have enough money for necessities and also for adornment and also for pleasure. Okay, so quite interesting. Just from my own life, I remember I was listening to a talk by someone who'd been in Anagarika for a long time. So Anagarika is a celibate. And I was listening to him talking about relationships, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting. And what he said has really stuck with me. He said, if you choose to be in a relationship with someone, love them. Yeah? Be kind to them. Yeah? So the person, often the significant person, the person that's closest to us, they seem to get the most hammered by our unskillfulness. Yeah? It just seems to be, maybe it's we let our guard down and they could see all of our sides. Well, that's really stayed with me. So if you have a significant other, make sure that you love them and are kind to them. Very, very simple. Okay, so the final two. So the teachers and people who support your life. In a way, I think that these can be the most expanded. So if I went back to my diagram of south and north, so teachers and people who support your life, this is where I felt like I got going the most. I had the most the most to say, the most to be grateful for, almost. So teachers are the people that we learn from. So I was struck when I was thinking about this, just how much education there is out there for us. So we've got all our teachers of our schoolings, but we've also got the internet and all access to all these books and YouTube, and all, there's an immense amount of education out there for us, of teaching out there for us. I think you'd be hard-find to want to learn something and not be able to, particularly if you speak English. So I'm filled with gratitude at thinking of all the teachers I have had and all the teachers I could have if I wanted. And in the downward direction, the people who provide services, the people who service us. And here, I feel like the fifth stage of the Metta Bhavana is a really good stage to work with this, to really cultivate some positive emotion, cultivate some metta, really use the imagination, the largest amount of people. So all the social services, all the people that maintain the roads, so a bit closer to home, Walkley as the staff, really grateful to those. Warren, the electrician, really grateful to him. EE support, grateful to them. They really helped me. The nurse at my doctor's, the pilot who flew the plane I was on, all the bus drivers. You could the list is endless. Really, it's a really expansive direction that just go to create the wonderful society that we live in. Okay, so we're part of a network of relationships. This is the advice to Sigala. Know that we're part of a network of relationships and act ethically in each one of these areas. And each one of these people on my list and each one of the people in our sphere of network of relationships will be the centre of their own sphere. So each one of you and me, we're interconnected with a web of people. And it might not be that this is the exact sort of form that your networks take, okay? It might not be this exact form, this exact combination of relationships. This was particular to Sigala and quite probably particular to most people, but may not be particular to you. There may be different relationships in your life, but you'll still be part of a network. And in this way, the advice to Sigala from the Buddha becomes a profound practice of wisdom. Okay? So we can use this advice to enter into the depths of how things are, of the Buddha's vision that he poetically described as praticca samuppada. So everything arises and ceases independent upon conditions, which are themselves conditioned by other things. So we're all intimately interconnected, and these connections aren't static, they're in continuous flux, they're all changing, forever deepening, and we're all conditioning each other. And there's an image for this from the Mahayana tradition called Indra's net. And Indra's net is a really potent, beautiful image. It's a net of jewels that stretches out infinitely in all directions. And if you were to look in one jewel, you would see the reflection of all the other jewels in that one jewel. And you'd also see those reflected jewels reflecting all the other jewels. Yeah, so reflections of reflections. And that's what it's like with us. We're intimately connected in all these different ways with all these different people. And we can look at one person in our web of connections and know that they're all intimately interconnected. And through this is it's like a doorway into seeing how things really are. Okay, so another poignant quote to end on, again from Sangharakshita: to eliminate the sense of separate selfhood is the first and last duty of one who sincerely desires to lead a genuine Buddhist life. And the advice to Sigala, as well as protecting him in the world, is a gateway into seeing how things really are, how we're all intimately connected. Thank you.